Today I wanted to share about my Kundalini awakening, or my spiritual awakening, whatever you want to call it. It was crazy and beautiful, and I've got pictures. I just remember as soon as this started happening, I was like, I need to get some pictures of this. This is crazy. I still can't believe it. So I also think it's important to share our vulnerable times as well as our good times. Especially today's time with social media. I just think it's so important to share our vulnerable moments. So I'm going to share mine. I'm probably going to start with saying that I've always kind of been a seeker. I remember being in the 8th grade on a school trip. We went to Washington, and I found this little souvenir there. It's this little plastic thing that had like a little rose in it. I remember getting that and thinking this would be really cool to try this new meditation technique. So I don't know how many kids are like that, but I just remember having thoughts like that. I would attempt meditation at that point, and I was never, successful, whatever that means. I always felt like I couldn't clear my mind, so I'd just give up. I've now, of course, learned that meditation, I guess, can be a lot of things, but for the most part, at first, it's about training your brain to meditate, really. It takes a long time of practice to figure out how to do it or to have any success with it. So I gave up. I was young, and I'd play around with it here and there, but I gave up. And fast forward till I'm a teenager, and I had something happen that caused me to have trouble sleeping. That's a long story for another video sometime maybe, but I couldn't sleep, and I was having a really difficult time with that. My dad got me some meditation tapes, and they were guided meditation because there wasn't YouTube or anything at that time, or internet even, I don't think, at that point. So I got these meditation tapes, and they worked beautifully. I had a ton of success with them, and slept better, and kept going on with life. I was a kid and didn't really care that much. So then fast forward, then go to roughly around the time I'm 21-ish. I am driving home from a friend's wedding, and I'm by myself in my car, and it had been raining really hard, or it was raining, and I wasn't speeding or anything, but I was going probably 50 maybe ish, 50-ish, and I hydroplaned, and I spin around the interstate like 4 or 5 times, and I end up flat in the middle of the road, and traffic's going this way, and I see a semi coming at me. So I'm like, wow, okay, this is it. This is the end. And I have that whole life flash before your eyes type of moment. And at that particular time, I was in a situation, that's another long story, that I didn't want to be in. The only reason I felt like I stayed in that situation was because of ego. I felt like it'd be too embarrassing to get out of it. So as soon as that happened, though, and my life kind of flashes before my eyes, I knew immediately, like, if I make it out of this, I'm done with that. So the semi hits me, and I don't know how fast they were going, but they were going pretty fast. Got chills thinking about it. I mean, it was so scary. And I remember the person driving the truck was a girl. She came and checked on me, and I barely had any scratches or bruises on me. I mean, I did, but not much. And she was like, I don't know how you're alive. I was like, I don't either. My car was completely totaled, and I had some terrible whiplash. Like, I had to stay in bed for several days, and I was in pain. I had to wear a neck brace, things like that. I was fine. And that was pretty life-changing for me. I immediately, of course, changed the situation that I was in. And I came out of that wreck without a scratch on me, no bruises or anything, and I feel like that was kind of my first shift in consciousness, so to speak, because I don't know if that awakened anything, but I just remember after that my ego really took a hit, and I was like, okay, do I really care? Is life really worth it to do this, you know? So I made some big changes in my life around that time. Fast forward again, this is roughly 2008, I think, and I get diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. I'm really sick. I have optic neurosis. I've lost sight in one of my eyes. Can't use my hand. Anyway, it's a long story for another video, another time, but suffice it to say, I was incredibly sick and did chemo and all kinds of things to try to get better. I naturally cured myself, and during this time, before I got better, I was determined. I'm going to get better. Like, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to find a way, and when I decide to do something, I'm pretty headstrong, and that was really one of those times, but I was also just incredibly depressed, and I made a decision that I'm going to do whatever it takes to feel better, mind, body, and spirit. I felt like I was completely defeated in all aspects, and decided to really make some big changes in my life. That's the first time I really can say that I had a definitive moment where I made sure that I was going to stick to this. So I got, all the books you can get, and I started becoming the seeker I felt like I was always supposed to be. So meditation came in at that point permanently. I made a commitment. I was like, I can commit to once a week, even if it's just 5 minutes. So that's what I started with. And then it went to about 10 minutes, and then about 15. And about once a week, sometimes twice. Sometimes I'd skip a week altogether. Sometimes I would skip several weeks. But for the most part, I stuck with it for probably, several years. Then about 3-ish years ago, I really realized how incredibly different I have become mentally. And ooh, excuse me. I realized how incredibly different I had become and how much it had impacted me and how much better I felt. And that's when I actually started doing it several times a week. And I went from about 5 to 15 minutes once a week-ish to probably about 3 times a week. Still keeping up with about 15-ish minutes each time. And that's when I really started to see a really huge difference in my meditation and my spiritual practice and everything, and feeling good and really being able to get to that place when you're meditating, that really good place. And I started noticing very little bit of synchronicities in my life, and I would be interested in taking it to another level, and all of a sudden I'd find an article about chakras or something, and didn't think a lot about that at the time, but one of the articles I came across was, doing the sounds with the chakras, like Om and all of that. I felt a little silly at first, but I, have been introduced to this through that dream book I mentioned earlier. But yeah, it was in there. I learned a lot about chakras, so I was always aware of them, and I thought this might be something to try. So I started using the sounds associated with the chakras. The one I noticed the most was my sixth chakra, and when I would use that sound, it would vibrate and just feel it right here, and it was just crazy. And I was like, well, this is working. So I kept up with that a little bit for a while, and that's where things started getting interesting. So about a year ago, after doing that for a little while, I felt a shift, and I don't know how to describe that other than my mental state started to change, and in a good way. So then I was feeling so good, I decided, I'm going to start doing this every day. So about a year and a half ago, I started doing it every day. And I often meditate before I go to bed at night. That's generally when I meditate during the day. Sometimes I do it twice a day, and that's usually, an afternoon thing or something. But it's always at night before I go to bed, and it ranges now at this point about 20 to 40 minutes, sometimes an hour. So I'm doing this for about a year, and one night I'm meditating, and I just feel this pulsing going up my spine, and it is incredibly bare and palpable and strong. And I almost immediately reached my back. I was like, what is that? And moving around and feeling and thinking I'm going to find something, and there's nothing there. So I lay back down. I'm like, wow, that's weird. And I felt it again. So I'm like, I'm just going to go with this. And it didn't start at my root chakra like you hear. It started in the middle of my back, like my sacral chakra, I suppose. So that's why I feel like maybe it awakened when I had that wreck, because I had gotten jerked around a whole lot. And awakenings can happen in lots of ways, and one of them is spontaneously in that way, or through meditation and different things. But I feel like that had a significant role in some way, and that it may have played a part. But yeah, so I'm meditating, I'm feeling that pulsing, and that happens for a while, and then it goes up into my head, and when it gets up here, I feel this vibration, and it's, I'm trying to think of how to describe it, and there's really almost just no words, but it felt like it was coming and going like this fire, and I could see it, and it was coming out and going in at the same time. And then while this was happening, like a download of just information is coming through me, and I'm twitching a little and stuff, which is actually kind of normal for me. Actually, when I started doing the sounds with my meditations and stuff, that started happening to me. And they're not called kriyas. That's, I think, the yoga poses. Something else. I'll try to put it on the bottom of the screen. But there's a word for it where your body like twitches and does things. And so that's happening a little bit as well. And yeah, it just gets incredibly intense. And to be honest, I just freaked out, got up, and I was like, I don't know what's happening. So I wake up the next day, or I kind of go about my business that night, and everything's normal, so to speak. But I wake up the next day, and my face is incredibly puffy and swollen, and yeah, I've got a picture here I'm going to put in. It was crazy. I could not believe that it caused that. And honestly, truly thought for a while, like, surely I had an allergic reaction. Went through all kinds of things, trying to figure out what I used, how I used it, new products, anything I could think of. I kept thinking of all the products, anything that I could have used that could have caused an allergic reaction. I couldn't think of anything. So I'm like, okay, maybe this is it. And that's when I started looking at weird meditation experiences. And I'd heard the term Kundalini in that dream book that I got years ago. I had read several books at this point, and I think I'd come across the term a few times, but I'd never, learned a lot about it or anything. And so that term kept coming up when I'd look at weird meditation experiences. So I started looking up what a Kundalini is, and I came across YouTube videos and blog posts and all kinds of things, and apparently there was this massive shift in consciousness in 2012, and that was a peak of a culmination of like 40 years of shifts in the planets and all kinds of things. Like it's just, you know, all kinds of information. And so that's why so many people are waking up. It's just this massive shift happened, and so I'm learning about Kundalini and figuring it out, and the next day I wake up and I look like this. It's getting worse. My face is hot and still swollen, and I'm looking pretty crazy at this point and freaking out quite a bit. So after reading a lot about it, I didn't hear anybody in particular that had this experience. So I email a few people, tell them what's happening, and they're like, yeah, that can happen. That's real. That's something that happens. And you should do this or this. And I got tons of little suggestions, but I researched them all, and I felt like the best thing for me to try was to meditate and focus on my energy in my head here and try to move it. And so I did. I meditated, and I tried to move that energy, that Kundalini energy. And the next day I wake up and I look like this. It had gone to my throat and was there. And I need to mention, the first night after I woke up, I had a big long hair coming out of my forehead it was crazy. I think I've got a picture or video of that too, I hope. So yeah, at this point it has gone to my throat, and I'm like, okay, this is what's happening. That made me believe that was what was going on, and I was just like, wow, this is real. And so that's when I really started researching it. And keep in mind, this is like day 4 or 5-ish for me, and I still look like this. Now I've got this red neck, and so I decide to continue meditating and moving it around. And it was like the 3rd time I think that I've meditated at this point since it happened. And now that I've learned a lot about it, I've learned when you don't lean into it or you don't know what's happening, it can be very scary, and that it can cause problems. So you need to let it kind of flow and do its thing. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to go with this and see what happens. So I meditate again and feel that same pulsing start. And at this time when it started, though, it was up in my throat area. And I want to say shoots, but I don't know if that's the right term, but it flows very fast throughout my whole body and feels incredibly unusual. And it eventually opens up my chakras again, and goes through my head, and again I'm getting like these downloads of information, and this continues for a really long time, and I'm just kind of vibrating, and it is so unusual. And yeah, after that time where I just kind of let it all happen and didn't panic, I looked normal. Like a day or 2 later, and I looked normal, and I didn't have any other problems with it. Every time I meditate now, it's such a different experience. Since then, I still feel it. It's still there. It's still active. It's still moving. And I get why it can be scary for some people. It reveals the worst parts of yourself to you, and that can be incredibly tough. There is something called the dark night of the soul, and that is essentially when it does reveal these bad parts of yourself to you. That can be manifested in all sorts of ways. And I realize now that I've had that happen a few times, and that's again why I think that this was something that started many years ago for me. So yeah, it is a incredibly tough experience to go through, but it is beautiful. And I recently was reading a book about vibration and Kundalini and all kinds of things in this, genre. And it was written in 1976 too, which surprised me. But anyways, it said in there that if everybody could know what the Kundalini does everybody would want to do it. And I believe that's true. Tough to wrap your head around. Yeah. I guess that's it.